but we will have a flyer for the next meeting so everybody can see. And they are looking for volunteers to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they will be doing the Easter egg hunt followed by an Easter basket raffle and giving away hot dogs to the children.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, also we had our first annual career fair for Kern County School District on Friday, and it was extremely well attended. We're looking forward to having more of those opportunities in the near future.
Okay, thank you. We've got people online. This is your opportunity also if you want to add anything, public comments or announcements.
How many are dialed in right now?
15.
Is it? Okay.
Nothing? Okay. So we'll move on to item 3, consent agenda. And the staff recommends approval of consent items by one motion. There's A and B, minutes of regular meeting February 21st, and check registers dated March 1st. All those in favor? Second. Motion, please.
Make the motion. Second.
Okay. And all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes carried. Okay, item 4, action items. First one is Astrobiotic Technology Test Site 5 land lease.
Mr. Vice President and members of the board, Astrobotics is the company that's based here in Mojave that is actually, I just learned a little bit more about them over the last couple of days, which is fascinating. They specialize in working on the technology for the next lunar landing. The company itself actually has the first lunar landing to occur since the 1970s, charted to actually land on the moon this summer. And guys, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, okay? I just learned this stuff recently. Astrobotics has actually been contracted with NASA to go ahead and construct that lunar test facility that we talked about several months ago. Originally, the airport was looking into doing the work, but it makes more sense to have a private entity do it. Astrobotics has been tasked by NASA to do so, to construct that facility. They're requesting to do so right next to their existing leasehold rocket test stand, Site 5. Which is approximate, and they're looking to increase their footprint by 2.35 acres. Maston, the company that was Astrobotics bought up was Maston. They did execute a master lease on February 17, 2022. Astrobotics is requesting a 1-year lease with a 1-year option and increase the land lease by that 2.35 acres for a total of 6 acres. Financial, this is potentially a $78,408 increase or $36,662 annually. No environmental or legal ramifications. Staff definitely recommends approval of the lease authorization for the CEO to finalize and execute the lease with pending council's approval.
So they're going to terraform this?
I don't know what methodology they're going to use. Do you guys have a methodology figured out yet?
Well, you said no environmental impact, so.
It'll basically be terraforming, moving earth around in shape, like plus minus elevation of 2 meters, and then it'll be covered with stucco and make it semi-permanent, and then whatever proper drainage.
And so this going to be a scaled up or down lunar lander that's going to go around their full size, or what's the intention for
100
that?
meters by 100 meters.
Okay.
It's basically mimicking a moving field.
And what's the power source for the lander?
The lander is resistant zodiac. We've been flying this in the past.
Okay.
I don't know how many years now.
So is that pretty identical to when it actually goes to the moon then? Okay. Yeah. All right.
So, except you'll have more thrust because of the gravity.
The gravity.
Right, yeah.
So is there a concern of any fire hazard to the treatment you put on the ground or anything?
No. It's
It's
very similar to concrete.
okay.
It's rocket powered then, like kerosene, rocket power.
Yeah, the vehicles actually alcohol and oxygen.
Okay.
The balance.
So when it like hovers or something, does it just create a big, crater in the desert and that?
Yeah, it does the intended stuff goes to keep it from like field dust every day.
Okay. About how much thrust would this be put into the ground, would you say?
5,000 pounds.
1,000 pounds, okay. So I'd be concerned if you're in the trailer, you'd be blowing this dirt all over the adjacent properties
Yeah,
and
that's
stuff.
why they're gluing it.
Yeah, gluing it though. Okay.
So I guess the other question would be, what kind of obligation would the tenant have to clean it up? If when
Our leases, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Lynn, but our leases typically require you to remove any improvement that when you vacate the test site.
Okay.
Now this is an infrastructure improvement that we wouldn't want to unless it had some sort of operational impact of some sort, like needing in the future to utilize that site for a rocket test stand. But it's great marketing, but more importantly, there are other entities that are lining up requesting access to it. China Lake already made a request to the airport when we just breathed that we were going to look into using this. So this improvement is actually a good one that we probably will want to keep, even if Astrobox no longer has use for it.
So what you're saying is the demand for this lunar site is out of this world.
My goodness. Great one.
Okay, so any other discussion you want to have? Do you guys want to present anything to us besides answer our questions about it?
I don't think we have a whole lot to say. I think there's a
Okay.
couple guys online.
If I may, I did want to throw out also that in addition to external interest in this, Astrobotic as a company is really excited to make use of this. As Tim mentioned, we're very excited that our Peregrine lander, which is scheduled for launch in early May, will be the first American soft lunar lander since Apollo 17. So in addition to that, we have a second lunar mission that's scheduled behind that. But even beyond what we're doing with our lunar landers, we also are developing a series of rovers that are doing some really interesting work on the moon. And we see this as an opportunity to not only test out systems that would be useful on the landers, but also as a test ground for those rovers and for looking for opportunities for entities that we partner with to come in and make use of this as well, including, I'll also throw out that we are a member of the Human Landing System National Team with Blue Origin and others that's developing the next human-rated lander for the moon. And so I think this would certainly be an interesting element that we would add to that collaboration.
Great, thanks.
That's Sean talking?
Yes.
Okay, that's what it said, I just didn't, I don't know the voice.
Okay, any other discussion? So now we need just a vote on the,
A motion to approve the use of the land, whatever the wording is.
I second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Okay, ayes carried. Congrats, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, we're looking forward to that. That's
Yeah, it's cool.
1972. Mm-hmm.
Okay, next item on the action list is Voyager aircraft ground lease. Figure 969 assignment.
Yeah, so Director Coleman is going to leave the room while this is discussed because it potentially involves a contract between the district and Coleman. He would have a conflict of interest. And so we're going to discuss that potential conflict and board action, but he has to leave the room while we do that. We just note for the record that 3 directors remain, so we still have the quorum. You can leave that open, Chuck. Yeah, leave that open and find Lynn's candy stash.
Yeah.
So the board may recall that last September, Director Coleman came to the board and asked to sublease space at this hangar. There'd been a question about whether or not doing so was a violation of Government Code Section 1090, which prohibits directors from having contractual conflicts of interest. After I discussed this with Director Coleman, he asked the Fair Political Practices Commission to give an opinion on whether or not this presented a conflict. And so the FPPC was given the relevant information regarding the lease, the district policy regarding leases and subleases, and the role that the board would play and the discretion it would exercise. At that time, the FPPC issued an opinion. The FPPC concluded that it presents a conflict of interest, but two exceptions, one called public generally, and the other called rule of necessity, may apply that would authorize the board to approve the sublease. The public generally exception states that directors may receive services from the agency that they represent if it's on the same terms and conditions as the public generally, and there's no special consideration. The FPPC concluded that the public generally exception may or may not apply. The FPPC was unsure about whether or not the board, in exercising its discretion, would have to give consideration to certain qualifications of Director Coleman that others may or may not have to go through. But the FPPC decided that they did not need to resolve that question because the FPPC concluded that the rule of necessity applied. So under the rule of necessity, if the agency is the only one who can take action on the item, then the agency is permitted to do so. Now, I'm going to be honest, this was a surprise to me. I did not expect the FPPC to come down with a rule of necessity decision. But they did, and they have the authorities that they cite, and I don't argue with their reasoning. I was just surprised that that is what they used to come to their conclusion. So the effect of an FPPC opinion is that if a public official seeks an opinion and gets an official opinion, because there are unofficial opinions from the FPPC, but they get an official opinion, one of the penalties under Section 1090 is it can be a crime if you knowingly violate the section. And so why you go and ask for an official opinion is it prevents you from being criminally prosecuted because you have exhausted your efforts in getting an opinion from the appropriate state agencies about whether or not you were complying with the law. So Director Coleman got this opinion, and the opinion concluded that under the rule of necessity, that the board could approve the sublease. The action before the board today is asking for approval to assign the lease to Director Coleman. Director Coleman intends or would like to purchase the hangar from...
Excuse me, there's a bit of an echo. Do we have speakers turned up there or something?
It might be too.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So Director Coleman intends to purchase the hangar from the current tenant, Voyager LLC. Voyager LLC has a land lease. So Voyager LLC owns the hangar, even though at the end of the lease, ownership will revert to the district. But in the meantime, Voyager owns the hangar and has decided to sell it. Director Coleman would like to buy it, but that in Voyager LLC no longer wants to be a tenant. So they have asked to assign the lease to Director Coleman when he purchases the hangar for the remainder of the term. The board is not being asked to consider any new or special terms for Director Coleman. It would be the same lease. It would be the same terms and conditions. And My view of the FPPC opinion is that the rationale that they applied to the subleasing also applies to the assignment clause. If the rule of necessity applies to the board approving a sublease, I don't know why it would not apply to the board approving an assignment. So
The sublease is an agreement between the leaser of the property and the sublease.
Yep.
This will be an agreement, I guess, between the airport and Director Coleman.
that's correct.
Okay.
That's
But
correct.
we're not negotiating with him because he's
No, I
adopting an
understand that.
existing one. That might be the distinction. I'm trying to understand the same thing you're saying. Is like I'm surprised that they have the same. They're treated the same, but maybe it's only because.
So the FPPC, Director Coleman has not asked the FPPC to weigh in on the assignment. Only the sublease.
Okay. You're just feeding us additional information that was
Yes.
not presented to them.
Let me ask this. It
Yeah.
surprised me too, all these years on the board. That's been the reason people have not run for the board or have gotten off the board. Directors cannot enter into a contract with
Yes.
the district while they're sitting on the board.
Yes.
Do we have a copy of his letter of request and a copy of their reply? And also, I'd like to see the lease. I mean, do we have that?
So you were all given the FPPC opinion last September when you approved the sublease.
We have a letter of his request.
No. So I contacted the FPPC,
Okay.
and so you do not have my emails with the FPPC.
No, we can't see the request.
You can,
Oh,
but you don't have them. But you have the FPPC's conclusion.
Okay. It's kind of in a different context right now, and I had no problem with the subletting part, but because of all these years of directors not running or getting off the board, it just is totally different than I'm used to. So I just really want to understand it, and maybe this will involve.
They were getting off because they wanted to purchase property.
Yeah, or their lease may be coming up and they wanted
Yes.
to renew it, or
Gotcha.
whatever be the case.
So we have had. So if a person did not run for the board because they had a lease and they thought that they couldn't, then they were just misinformed about the law. The law has never prohibited a tenant from running for the board. What the law prohibits is a director, a public official, from entering into a contract while they are on the board.
And that's what we're doing.
So arguably, yes, you are. So we have some leases that are standard non-negotiable. Probably about 10 or 12 years ago, the board created those leases so that the public generally exception would apply, because there's authority from the California Attorney General that says at airport districts, if you have this standardized lease where there's no negotiation, it's just next in line gets the lease, that the public generally exception applies.
Give me an example of that real quick so I can relate to one of those leases.
So the term, the rent rate, any renewals, insurance requirements, right? All of those are fixed.
So
They're not
I think
negotiated.
If I can clarify, I think the issue is that entering a contract is a conflict of interest if you're negotiating your own contract with if he's on the board and he's the guy negotiating. But if he's not negotiating anything because it's all a standard dollar per square foot and he's just adopting one, then it falls into either a gray area or a
Yes.
clean area, however you want to
Okay.
interpret it.
I'd like to see some policy that clarifies that. So, and I'm just going to make something up. Airport has a hangar for rent, and I'd like to enter into a lease as a director for that hangar at the established rate for 5 years or whatever. I could do that.
Yeah, you guys approved the
Okay,
policy
see,
probably in the last 10 years. Len is, and that's why we have the
But
hangar
what would have to
wait
be
list.
clear is if you are not on the wait list and you bump everyone
Yeah.
else,
Oh, no.
Then- wait, but that would be
I'm
an
not worried about
example of
minutia.
you-
I'm just trying to
No, I'm saying that would be an example of you using some privilege
Yes.
on the
Right,
board
right.
to
Yes.
influence Lynn, for instance, rather than if it's just something that's a matter of course, I guess. I'm using layman's.
For that, because that, I mean, I would like to have that, but I'd like it to be clear because I don't want to
Yeah,
be
of course.
interpreted as a conflict of interest, which right now I think it is. The way I would.
Well, I know we went through that
Yeah.
process when that policy was adopted. When the board adopted that policy, we went through the whole process of concluding, could you do it? Under what circumstances could you do it? And what was the legal authority for doing so? And I myself was here at the time, you were here at the time, and we reviewed that extensively in coming up with the standardized lease. But we could certainly put something in writing.
I think a little clarity would help because it was kind of very general in my interpretation and memory. Maybe it wasn't. I just how I remember it.
Yeah, no,
That would clarify some of that. I would like to see your letter of request and the reply. I know we probably. I'd like to just see it, see how it was worded.
yeah, it's in the FPPC response. They repeated back what I told
And that
them
was
about
back
the
in
conditions.
September.
Yeah, and we can send that to you.
I would like
We'll
to
send
see
that
it,
to you so you don't have to.
because this is
research.
kind of a real controversial thing, and I sure don't want to restrict anybody, but I don't want it to somehow be, hey, we're showing favoritism to a director or something. That,
The other thing is the district can also ask for an opinion. Right, as I'm thinking about it, there isn't anything that would prohibit you from asking for an
I sure
FPPC
like clarity
opinion.
because it's, again, I know directors that have didn't run or somebody. I think you had a guy, Steinmetz or something, that's had a lease going to come up or something, and
Oh, he decided not to run
because of something like
because he
that.
wanted to purchase something.
Well, those type of things. Just a little clearer, because we don't want to. Maybe he didn't understand. I don't know what the minutia of it was. That.
Yeah.
So, I would like to see an opinion from him on this and resolve it so that we can.
Yeah, so generally, I deal with board members.
Say again?
I deal with board members.
Right.
So if one of you has a question, and for as long as I've been here, we've had directors who have had leases, businesses on the airport, all sorts of issues. So we've dealt with this many, many times. As a matter of fact, the Voyager lease, the original one, I think it was when Dick was on the board.
Really? Okay.
Or maybe it was before he was on the board, he had the lease, and then he assigned it from himself personally to Voyager LLC. So so we've dealt with this a number of times as a board. People who are not on the board generally, I don't give legal advice to. So it probably would not have come to me if someone was like, I'm going to run. Oh, but I have a lease, so I'm not going to run. Right? That wouldn't have been something I would have considered.
Yeah, some clarity, I think, in it would really help.
So how would you guys like to proceed today?
We'll defer the vote until Director Valentine gets his answers.
And I'd like to get an opinion for the airport. I want to get this cleared up. It's because it seems to be a gray area. Now here we are on.
How do you propose we clear it up?
Get an opinion from the FPPC regarding the airport's position on it.
Yeah, I will call the attorney there. Who
And then
handles this.
possibly we can construct something in our bylaws to kind of add a little bit of clarity.
Sure. You already
And here's
have.
why. If you're not a board member, they can't get any information from you. They just have to kind of interpret what they read. And in general, basically, you can't enter into a contract if you're on the board.
And that generally is true. That
And that's what I'm
generally
saying.
is true.
Some clarity would help.
Yeah.
If it's the
This is assigning an existing
I got an
contract.
existing lease and I just want to renew it, but I want to run for the board, but I'm not going to because that lease is going to come up.
So you could not renew. The law is clear. You cannot renew a lease because you're entering into a new lease. And
It's a
there are
negotiation.
a number of cases on that.
Even
So
though the rates and terms are all fixed.
unless it is one of the leases we have that is standardized, available to the public generally on the same terms and conditions, and is not negotiable, then yes.
Okay.
And those are I think those are just for the hangars, right, Lynn? Yeah. So any other type of lease, land lease, building lease, office lease, would not fall under that policy and would be prohibited by 1090.
So if we had a employee of Astrobotics, did I say that right?
Yeah.
On the board of directors, and they wanted to build a lunar surface and sign a lease for some dirt adjacent to their property, that would be a new lease, or is that a standardized lease because it's so many dollars per square foot? Where does that fall?
So that would be a new lease because you're negotiating the term of the lease. You're negotiating renewals. The rent rate might be standard, or it might be negotiated.
So you're saying our hangars are a template.
Yes.
Everyone gets the same deal, etc.
Yeah.
Whereas the dirt deal, it depends on what their business plan is.
Yes.
We work with them. Okay.
That helps.
Do we still want to get
I would.
a ruling? Are we opening
I
ourselves
do
up
because I
to
want to.
confusion if we ask them to rule on something that they previously Chuck asked or you asked on his behalf? Could they contradict each other and we end up in some limbo or something?
Wouldn't that be
So the thing is,
It never happened.
they could come to a different conclusion, but they are the FPPC, and they're the agency that's charged with overseeing this area of law.
Yeah.
So
Are we
whatever
asking
their
them to rule
decision
on it,
is,
or just give us advices?
well, you can ask for an unofficial or an official opinion.
Huh.
I always think that you should take the time to ask for an official opinion because of some of the legal protections it gives you.
Okay.
In their unofficial opinions, because they are unofficial, can sometimes be vague.
I wanted to be official. This affected me in 2009, I think. And I chose, because I was a director and wanted to serve on the board, to not pursue it. And it was basically the same thing, just assume something that somebody already has.
You know, I assumed the same thing when Dick moved to Idaho. I thought, oh, that's a desirable place.
Yeah, let's get a
I thought,
ruling on it.
But as a director, I can't even consider that.
Yeah,
And so it didn't occur to me because I thought it would be a conflict.
Honestly, I thought it would be a conflict too. But something that you learn in law is you go and you ask whatever the final authority is, whether it's an agency or a jury or a court or whatever,
Okay.
because sometimes they will come up with opinions that are
I would feel more
very different than
comfortable.
what you thought.
And then, like I say, maybe some clarity so that if a potential person would like to run as a director, and that might be a question, maybe there's a little bit of clarity.
We'll provide as much clarity as we can.
Yeah.
1090 is a very complicated area of law. It's been around a long time,
Yeah.
since the 1800s, the late 1800s. And it's its own whole body of law. So I don't think we want to write a treatise on 1090, but we can certainly talk about when you can or cannot do certain things.
Okay.
I do have a question from the public. If the lease is transferred to Director Coleman and the lease terms of the Voyager doesn't change, how is that a conflict?
So the conflict is that a director cannot enter into an agreement with an agency while they are serving on the board. So simply because of the fact that he's a director and it will be a contract with the district, it is presumptively a conflict of interest. The question is, does an exception apply to the conflict? It's not that there isn't a conflict. The FPPC recognizes that this constitutes a conflict of interest for the director. But what they are saying is, under the rule of necessity exception, you can still proceed.
Could you explain that rule?
So the rule of necessity is, it states that when the public official or the legislative body is the only one who can act on a matter, then despite the conflict of interest, they can take the action that is necessary. There are two scenarios where rule of necessity is generally considered. One is a procurement, situation, buying goods and supplies and services. Generally, this applies in rural communities where you may have a very small source of goods or services. I think Director Valentine is familiar with that.
Monopoly on aircraft hangars in this area. Is that kind of what it?
No. So
Okay.
it would be more. You need to buy. You need to buy electronic gear,
Go ahead and use me. 'Cause
and there's only one source of that gear reasonably nearby.
Well, Wayne vetted me, and the airport was purchasing from me about 7 years prior to me being on the board. So that relationship was established. And it eventually did get so questionable, and they bought so little. I just finally said, I can't sell to you guys anymore.
So if the
I get
district
that.
is procuring,
But why is that a necessity for someone to rent a hangar?
so under the non-procurement theory, the airport, the hangar, and the lease involve the airport. The legislative body is the only one who can make the decision on that, and therefore there's no one else to turn to approve the transaction.
Right. So if we had granted Lynn the power to negotiate leases without our involvement, in theory,
With a
person-
lot of variables on that line of reasoning. But yes,
that would be moving in that direction away from the conflict, right?
yes.
Okay.
So you can't delegate your authority to avoid a conflict.
Yeah, right. No,
But there are delegations of authority that are recognized in the case law
Well,
on the
someone who
non-procurement
decides what
conflicts.
transistor to buy at Radio Shack is not the board. It's
Yeah.
dictated by the need of the component that broke or whatever.
Yeah.
And the person has the knowledge of how to replace it.
We approved this for 20 to the hangar. As far as subletting, nothing changes. It would still come to the court. The board recuse himself. The board would approve the subletting.
So all of the terms of the lease that currently exist would continue to exist.
Okay.
So nothing
Make sure there's not a hiccup for him down the road. But
there isn't, and then when the lease expires, the lease expires.
Okay.
So for
this
instance,
lease does not have a first right of refusal or anything tied to it. It's just
it has one renewal term, and when that renewal term is up, the lease expires and the hangar becomes the district property.
so the renewal would be part of this agreement.
Yeah.
Because it's already
Okay.
posted.
So you've got your direction, and so we're going to defer on a vote on this action item, right? So
Yes.
Great.
They can bring Chuck back in?
Yes.
Okay. Good job today.
No, it
going
surprised you
down.
like it surprised me, and I just. Wow.
Okay, moving on to item 5, reports.
Good afternoon. This is the financials for January 31st. Bank balance increased $300,000. We'd received another payment from the property taxes that were due in December. Some more trickled in January. And then also got our quarterly taxes from our LAIF account. With interest being up, that's definitely, that impacts getting more on the account. Operating revenues at 62% and operating expenses are at 51%, should be at 58%. So we're still on track with the revised budget that we had done. Fuel sales, they sold 88,000 gallons for the month of January. Year to date is at 481,000 gallons. For the AR over 90 days, working with American Verde, working with legal on that. So no action to be taken today. SpaceLink, as well as working with legal. And then Dean Sost, he is continuing to make payments. He made a payment yesterday of $250. So that's been applied to his account. So still continuing to work on getting payments and moving forward on
Okay.
getting the aircraft removed. Fitness Center has 577 members, so continuing to grow there. So the monthly expenses on that account is becoming less. Do you have any questions?
None? Anybody, any other questions from the community?
One more question for me, if I could. Is it still 90 days and Dean's paying the amount? Is he waiting until the 89th day to pay?
Yeah, some of his balance is over 90 days at this point. So he kind of just comes in, it's kind of sporadic. Sometimes it's $250, sometimes it's $500. So
Okay.
yeah, we are working on getting the monthly, so we stop accruing the monthly and then just continue to get payments.
We're charging interest.
Huh?
We're charging interest.
Yeah.
CEO report?
Mr. Vice President, members of the board, I included the second page is actually mostly just notes on. I've attended about 4 space conferences over the last month and made some comments. I'll just do a quick over that here in a second. Updates, runway 1230 rehabilitation project. We did complete the independent fee assessment and submitted to the FAA for approval. Work is scheduled to begin on the week of May 29th. Inland Port, I don't have any updates at this time. They've been relatively quiet over the last 2 weeks, but I'm sure more will come soon. Water main improvements, Topo survey completed. They're working on the preliminary plan sets. I believe that they were out here surveying last week with Floyd, right? And I think they're working on some preliminary drawings at this point. Hangar development update. Tomorrow, I'm going to be showing a potential developer the existing sites to get some insight and interest. Been working on that in the background an awful lot, and trying to discover who's interested in potentially building and what all they need. So, hypersonic corridor update. We just provided you guys with a draft technical report with recommendations to move forward. No other action is required at this time. Taxiway Alpha Lighting Circuit Project, the plans are in development. Bid docs and reports are still in progress, working with the FAA to meet their very short timeline. Heads up, Senator Feinstein's office reached out to have a conference call regarding the FAA reauthorization bill that's intended to be passed or voted on relatively soon. I've already spoken to McCarthy's office and the other senator, not Feinstein. I'm sorry, I'm still learning, like Ramos or something. Anyhow, the other U.S. senator just advising them that we support the reauthorization bill because.
Explain that.
Yeah, sure. It's actually kind of fascinating. I learned a little bit about this recently too. The FAA is not just paid for. Like they don't have a budget that they work on for continuous years. There's a periodic reauthorization bill, and then Congress has to pass in order to pay for the FAA various projects and things that they do. So with this new bill, there's a couple of changes. One of which that it does not impact us. It's on the passenger facility charge, or I'm sorry, passenger facility charges. And the AIP funding. As you guys know, as passengers, every route segment, you are taxed. That goes into a pot that pays for the infrastructure of the National Airspace System, including Mojave, the runway 1230 projects, for example. How those funds are allocated, get voted on each time there's reauthorization. One of the things that's really interesting about the reauthorization bill for this year is that they're including spaceport funding for infrastructure. I think the ask is going to be somewhere around 120 million. That's a tiny fraction of what everybody really needs right now. But unfortunately, spaceports being unfunded and a huge demand for infrastructure means the FAA has to somebody's got to start putting up some money here soon. Those are the demands. So that's really essentially at the end of the day what we're trying to do is every couple of years this bill comes up and we have to make adjustments for how those funds are spent.
Well, that's good news. That's really good news.
It is, and guys, it's just the beginning. One thing I can tell you guys to take away from all these conferences, we haven't even started the boom for the space race yet. I'm calling it a space race. That's what it is at the end of the day. It's just this huge competition of all these private entities that are trying to get their stuff into space. Great thing is Mojave's poised for that. Horrible thing is we lack the infrastructure to support all these future missions. So we're trying to get into the ground level right now and trying to advocate to say, hey, yes, we can support the mission for space, lunar landings, Mars missions, but we need the infrastructure to do that. And traditionally, the FAA has always pitched in for airports for infrastructure. Because, guys, I mean, we can't afford a $10.5 million project. That's insane. But we do need the infrastructure in order to meet the mission nationwide, which is to push space testing and exploration off of NASA and onto the civilian entities, which means entities like us have to have the infrastructure to facilitate that. So it's very positive. It's just making sure that we're getting our needs out there. There have been some discussions on how those funds would be distributed that I disagree with wholeheartedly. I'm hoping that the FAA, I've already brought that up to our congressional representation, so that the FAA, when it comes time to distribute those funds, they get distributed to spaceports that are meeting the demands, not pie in the skies that are built in the middle of nowhere and don't have to operate an airport with them. So just throwing it out there. There are a couple of concerns, but I feel like we are ahead of the power curve at this point. Just an interesting finding too. There's 14 civilian spaceports in the nation right now that are licensed. There's 14 in the pipe. That means that we're going to have to get really competitive here sooner or later because these entities don't have space operations. They're going to try to take some of those entities that we want to focus on and bring out to Mojave. So one of the things, the takeaways I got from attending these conferences is, as a spaceport, we don't do a good enough job at marketing. We can improve on that. That's fine. That gives we have plenty of time to work on that. But that was one of the takeaways. Another takeaway is we are actually doing an excellent job doing what all the other spaceports in the nation are doing right now. All the other spaceports are worried about trying to fill vacancies with their tenants for specialized jobs. So trying to connect the pipeline, which we're doing a lot of work with here in Mojave right now, right? They're all actively engaged with their communities. We really need to work on that, including they host rocket competitions for college students to, all sorts of different things that to bring the public to their spaceports. And I think that we can do a better job with that one. Hypersonic testing is quickly becoming a focus point. As a matter of fact, there's a bill that's proposed to actually connect all the existing spaceports with hypersonic corridors, with the intent of having a hypersonic core network of spaceports. Whether that's going to come to fruition or not, I don't know. It's great, though, for Mojave because we are on the West Coast. We are a spaceport. We are a termination location for any kind of flight like that. And if we are an intermodal facility, I can see cargo being the first step. There's some talk about trying to move the Office of Space with the FAA under the umbrella of the Department of Transportation. That's an interesting perspective because it would be an FAA department reporting directly to the DOT. The reason why is because this is really fascinating. Nobody wants to be regulated in this industry for various reasons, and I understand. But they want to have less regulatory enforcement to allow for innovation. Makes sense. That's kind of what we do here at Mojave. So, I mean, really the take home from this at the end of the day, guys, is that there's lots of opportunities are coming down the pike. There's going to be a huge push for spaceports. We are doing a good job in a lot of areas, but we definitely need to step up the marketing efforts, and we'll focus on that.
Thank you.
Did you want me to talk about the Brown Act changes under your report?
I mean, if the vice president's cool with it.
Sure.
So, as you probably know, the COVID state of emergency expired on February 28th. Previously, the board had been operating under the procedures in AB 361, which waived certain requirements of the Brown Act while there was a state of emergency that included social distancing. So now that the state of emergency has expired, now that AB 361 does not apply, we go back to the traditional Brown Act rules. Those are, if a director appears remotely, we have to put that address on the agenda. The director has to post that agenda at their location, and that location has to be available to the public. And the fourth requirement is that at least 3 other directors have to be participating in the meeting from within the district's boundaries. So, in addition to that, the legislature made a change that allows for directors to participate remotely without posting their address on the agenda or having the place open to the public if there's an emergency situation or just cause. An emergency situation is where the individual or a family member has an emergency medical situation that prevents them from attending the meeting. Okay, so in that case, the director needs to notify us that this situation arose, it's an emergency, and you will not be able to participate in person. At that point, at the board meeting, or at some time, the chair will approve the remote participation, and then the director will have to appear both by audio and video and be visible during the meeting. So that's emergency.
Okay.
For just cause, there are 4 types of reasons in which you can participate without posting the agenda, without posting your address on the agenda or having it open to the public where you are. That is childcare or caregiving to an immediate family member, contagious illness that prevents you from attending in person, a physical or mental disability, or if you're on travel on official business. So under those circumstances, again, we don't have to post the address on the agenda and your location does not have to be open to the public. However, there are limitations for the emergency and just cause. This does not apply to if you put your address on the agenda and your location is open to the public. These limitations do not apply. You can't do it for more than 3 consecutive months, more than 20% of the board's regular meetings in a calendar year, or more than 2 meetings if the board meets less than 10 times a year. And then the final rule is if you're doing emergency or just cause, 3 directors have to be in person at the physical location identified on the agenda. So it's not 3 directors within the district's boundaries. So if we only have, if we're appearing remotely, 2 directors are appearing remotely, their address is on the agenda, 2 are here in person, and then the 5th has to appear because of an emergency or just cause reason, they can't. They just miss that meeting because you don't have 3 people physically present here in the boardroom.
Okay. And the 3 present, or any of those, we take a vote or something to include that emergency member?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So,
assume the remote people can vote as well?
not the person who's appearing remotely.
Not the emergency person, but the...
Yes.
So you could have 3 present, 1, let's say, in or out of the district, but checked all the boxes with posting their location.
Yes.
That person can vote as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
So that is the new element. They've changed some of the rules on when records become available, documents become available after the agenda has been posted.
Mm-hmm.
We'll work with staff on that. And then they revised the rules a little bit on removing disruptive people from meetings. So, but otherwise, the big one is the addition of the emergency just cause rationale for appearing remotely. Okay? no action is required. It's just an
Okay.
update on the
Thank you.
change in the law.
So if there's nothing else, we're going to move to closed session report.
Director comments.
Director comments and items not on the agenda.
Sorry.
Bottom of page 1.
Director comments and items not on the agenda. We've got directors. All right then. So we're going to move into a closed session. At the end of that, we'll give a summary, and if anyone wants to stay online and wait, they're welcome to, but you'll be locked out during the closed session.
And I'd like to thank the gentleman that took the time to attend the meeting. It's nice to have
Yeah, it's really nice to have
someone
a
back here. I really appreciate it. Well, and being in person to me just is